You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hello, my name is Uwe Schulte, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back to our second series of our podcast, Let's Talk Sustainable Business. The series is brought to you by the Conference Board Global Sustainability Center. Today, I will be talking to Geraldine Matchett, co-CEO and CFO at Royal DSM. First, let me introduce our guest, Geraldine Matchett. She joined DSM's managing board in August 2014 and became co-CEO in February 2020. Geraldine holds a bachelor's degree in physical and human geography from Reading University in the UK and a master's degree in sustainable development from Cambridge University. Geraldine is co-chair of the Prince of Wales Accounting Sustainability CFO Leadership Network. The network brings together leading CFOs to help embed the management of environmental and social issues into business processes and strategy, particularly, of course, through the finance function. Welcome, Geraldine. Please tell us a bit about yourself and how, as a finance person, you got involved with sustainability.
Yes, hello, and thank you very much for having me. So, who am I? Well, as you said in your introduction, I am a geographer at heart, physical and human geography. But in my life, at some point, you also need to earn an income, and that's what took me actually into finance. And as a result, I've done most of my career in finance as a CFO, and indeed, I'm currently now also a co-CEO, which is very nice. But I have been known as a little bit of a maverick CFO because of my my background. And I have to say that one of the things I've always had on my wall is a map of the world and looking at the flows of goods going from one continent to the other and the flow of people. And one of my favorite invention is Google Earth. I find that's absolutely fantastic. You can zoom in, zoom out. And if you've been brought up in geography, the fact that societies thrive partly through their interaction and the way that they behave with their physical environment is very common sense. And so that's my mindset and has always been for a long time. And then when you start looking at more carefully that interrelationship between societies thriving, which means companies thriving, and the physical environment, looking at books like Collapse, which looked at the civilizations that collapsed not because they were unsuccessful, because they were too successful and they consumed themselves out of resources. It's a book by Geraldine, which I like very much. And that sets your mind into, well, hang on a second, how can we as societies choose to succeed by taking care of our physical environment as much as our own needs? And yeah, that's who I am. And that's why embedding sustainability, embedding environmental consideration and social consideration in how to drive a company is what makes me extremely excited to be where I am right now.
Sounds really great, but I think we have to make a disclaimer here because for all those aspiring students of geography, you can actually make a living out of geography as well. It might be a bit more difficult, but it can be done. I hope you confirm that.
I fully agree. And to be honest, at the time, I was a student in geography when climate change was still a big debate. So my master's at Cambridge was all about, does climate change really exist, and what are the facts, etc. Now, this is not a debate. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And to be fair, that was the faculty of geography, and it is now today's hottest topic.
Yeah.
And there is space for everyone. I would happily have stayed in the geography science part as well, but at the time, there were more careers to be had, trying to link the two with business as well.
I think we're glad that you've done what you've done. But I think our listeners are not necessarily familiar what Royal DSM is actually doing as a company. I understand it originally stood for Dutch state mines, but you've gone through a number of metamorphoses. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, no, absolutely. And indeed, DSM is not necessarily a household name because we're a B2B business. So if I start the story with Once Upon a Time, DSM was indeed the Dutch state mine, so the coal mining company of the Netherlands. And over time, of course, the future of that activity became very dubious. So the company said, well, let's see how we transform into something else, which led to transforming into actually petrochemical refining for a period. But that as well, based in the Netherlands, is not something very easy when you're not backward integrated into oil fields. That got divested, and bit by bit by bit, we actually transformed ourselves into whom we are today, which is effectively a 85% nutrition, health, and bioscience company. So we're actually the world's biggest producer of what makes food nutritious. So micronutrients, vitamins, omega 3s, probiotic, prebiotics, and that is for humans and for animals. So we are the leading company in the world in that, and there's a lot of chemistry in that, but there's also a lot of biotech in that. And then we have 15%, which is in specialty materials that go into mobile phones, cars, really focused on recyclability, circularity, bio-based type materials. So fine chemistry and biotech, that's who we are today. And to give you an idea of size, we are about a 10 billion turnover company with about 24,000 colleagues around the world, so global footprint. And we are a Dutch listed corporation in terms of our headquarters and our origin. So from Dutch state mines, we like to think of ourselves today as DSM, actually standing for doing something meaningful.
Wow, that's a nice change of acronym here that I hadn't heard that one before. But it's a huge transformation, and I would love to hear a little bit how sustainability played a role in that. I understand that you were sort of looking at your capabilities and what and at scenarios of what's coming ahead. Is my understanding correct there?
Yes. So actually, sustainability is at the core of our transformation. I would say, in particular, beyond the transformation of the portfolio changes, which have taken place over decades. But if I look particularly at the last 20, 25 years of our history, our transformation is very much anchored actually in the Dutch corporate law. And what I mean by that is in the Netherlands, as a managing board, we are accountable to all stakeholders. So it's not shareholder capitalism, it's stakeholder capitalism. And it's embedded in our articles of association. So in effect, we are virtually a B Corp by definition. Um, and on that basis, it's actually, and that's why you see a lot of Dutch corporations being leading in sustainability in business, because we've been thinking about it for a long, long time. So we've been what we call a triple P bottom line company for 20 years plus. So people, planet, profit. And that gives us a very long heritage as an environmental and socially conscious company. And it's actually interesting that when we introduced incentives that mirrored that objective, so 50% of our short term and long term incentives are anchored on financial performance, but 50% on people and planet. And at the time, we made the first page of the Financial Times. It was like, oh my God, what is this listed company, 100% free float, getting distracted about all of these things around people and safety and engagement and greenhouse gases? And that was, we're talking here 12, I think even more than 12 years ago. So it was a bit scary at the time, but it was also very much what has been driving our transformation, because we have a very important saying in our company, which is you cannot call yourself successful in a world that fails. So, no matter how great your share price, no matter how great your financial performance, if it is at the detriment of the people around you, both upstream and downstream, then are you really successful? And when you take that mindset, you start caring about your impact on the society around you, about your impact on your direct physical environment, so your own water consumption, greenhouse gases, etc., but also what you're doing to the whole chain. So what Are your behaviors driving in terms of changes for your suppliers? And are you supporting your customers? Because we're B2B, we're in the middle of the food systems. We're not in agriculture and we're not in a consumer brand, but we are at the link of the two. And and that's really what's been underlying our transformation. So really building over a long heritage of Triple P to become a leading ESG stock, and very much a purpose-driven organization from the inside out, I would say.
I must say, I do remember it's longer than 12 years. I'm absolutely certain, but I remember that. And I've ever since have had a sort of an internal watching brief on DSM. And, when I look at your share price development, those people extremely worried at the time, they were very wrong. So you're doing all right, I would say. But let's focus a little bit on that, because again and again, when I talk to CFOs, for example, they say, "This is all very fine, Uwe, but show me the money." Yeah. So, you as a finance person, um, is it a compromise? Do you have to sort of forgo your financial performance, or how do you see it?
Mhm. Yeah, this is a long-standing debate, right? Can you do well financially if you also invest in the longer term? Now, the world has changed a lot. I will not deny that when we started on this journey, and when we were one of the few companies who were doing this, we were doing it a little bit in secret. So we did not make a lot of noise about it. When we were on investor roadshows, we would focus on financial performance, and we would keep that a little bit to ourselves, to the point that it would even surprise some investors, because about 35% of our investor base is in the US. And we would just, unless particularly asked, we wouldn't particularly put it forward. Now, the world has changed massively. And if I look today and here I'm talking for listed companies, where often the dilemma is the most striking, because you have to perform on a quarterly or 6 monthly, you're challenged to defend your financial performance. Yet it is true that some of these considerations require forward thinking and consistency. But if I look today at what's happening in the markets, we've estimated between 40 and 50% of our shareholders have subscribed to principles of responsible investing, so PRI. So a big chunk, and realizing that, of course, a lot of money is invested through passive index funds, right? So here, that is a very big number, and the pure ESG funds are now coming over 10% of our shareholders. But more importantly, it is part of everybody's conversation when you're a listed company. What are you doing about these things? So today, it's virtually becoming a qualifier. So I think the world has moved a lot. And interestingly, it got even further accelerated by the pandemic, which was not an obvious outcome of last year's challenges. But if I kind of zoom out to maybe for those listening who aren't in a listed company, why does it make sense? And it makes sense as a finance director in many different ways. We tend to use the structure when it comes to sustainability in three buckets: reduce, enable, and advocate. So when we talk about reduce, we're talking about our own footprint. It can be reduce or improve, it depends, but it's all about de-risking your own future. If you do not improve the way you operate, at some point, it's going to catch up with you. You have technologies which are outdated. You start getting hit by new regulations, which are becoming more and more stringent in all industries. And therefore, by making sure that you're staying ahead of the curve, although there's a bit of an investment at first, you are setting yourself up to be at the right place at the right time. If you wait until the regulations force you to change, you will be a laggard in your own space. Other competitors will have done it and you not. So there's a huge element of de-risking. The easy one is, of course, reducing the cost of inputs, the cost of divesting waste streams, etc. But that's the very minimal part. The bigger part is, how do you stay ahead of the fact that society is evolving on all of the criteria, particularly when it comes to environmental impact. energy mix, these kinds of things, but also, to be fair, on social aspects. And I think that is the next big hurdle for a lot of companies to anticipate what is, sustainable livelihoods going to do, and how do we look at these things. But so this whole bucket of reduce, which is very easy to see the business case and the de-risking factor. The second bucket is enable. And what we mean by that is, how do you use what you are doing as a company to enable both your suppliers and your customers to reach their ambitions? So we are in the food space, in the food system. So what we worry about is customers, for instance, are really wanting to ensure that they can provide products which are healthy for the humans, but also healthy for the planet. So there's an increasing pool of innovations. And what you notice is, so for instance, we've had customers who said, listen, we have a very ambitious scope 3 roadmap. We need you to be on top of your greenhouse gases. Now, very easy for us because we've been doing it for a long time, because we did the reduce part. But this is a competitive advantage. Or if they're looking at regenerative agriculture or switching diets towards more plant-based, how can we support? This is all linked to their ambitions. So we have introduced a methodology. We call it Brighter Living Solutions, and we measure all of our sales against it. So either it is market leading from an eco plus point of view, so ecologically, or it is market leading socially on the social impact. And our target, and we're pretty much there now, is that 65% of our sales are market leading in either ecological or social criteria. And when you do that and you set yourself that target, the advantage is that your whole organization, you're embedding it in the daily activities of what you do. But that can be done in any sector. And last but not least, the reason why it makes sense also financially is if you go and advocate. So I'll give a very simple example here, which is kind of hardwired in our financials. We've been advocating for a meaningful price on carbon for many, many years. We introduced an internal price on carbon as a result, I think 6 years ago now, with 50 euros per ton. We're actually increasing it to 100 euros per ton. It's driving our CapEx innovation decisions. It is driving also the way that we drive performance. And we've also been, very much structuring our equity and our debt financing linked to performance on these targets. So we have a revolving credit facility for 1 billion linked to our greenhouse gas reductions, for example. So the advocate is also linked to the environment in which you operate. So all of that, basically, the long and short is, as a CFO, not only does it make sense, it's a must.
It sounds to me like a CFO is well advised to get to know this environment a little bit better they're operating in. Otherwise, they might be outperformed by competition before they know it. Um, you opened almost a Pandora's box by saying what your carbon price thinking is. That in itself is a huge discussion and a very important one. And with the EU Green Deal and the idea of cross-border adjustments, we will see a very volatile field there for a while. And it's interesting that you have taken again a precautious position to say we base what we do on something that is a very sensible price rather than what's currently being discussed. Yeah, so
Absolutely. And I do want to point out here that we are a sector which has a carbon footprint. So it's not as if it's a paper tiger and, some companies make big claims, but to be honest, their footprint is virtually nothing other than taking the plane. Here we have real production facilities. So we have 1.5 million tons of CO2 emissions broadly. We're bringing it down. We have an absolute reduction roadmap, 30%, at least 30% by 2030, of course, aiming for zero. And we are an engineering, we are very much a science-based organization. So when we put these things out there, we have a real roadmap behind it. But I think it's important, and that is the role of, by the way, the finance function, to embed this in decision making at the meaningful price, because some people have a debate, oh, why don't you take the current market price? Well, since I started, it used to be below 10 euros, yeah, in Europe, and now we're sort of approaching, gradually it's increasing. It will be at 50 in no time.
Yeah.
And that's why we're shifting now to 100, because we believe that that is on the horizon within a very uh, normal business time frame. So not 30 years out, but within the next 5 years, and that impacts our decisions.
I would love to go on, but let's on the carbon price, because a lot of people are very interested in that as well. Maybe we have another conversation about that another time. Um, but the conference board has recently published a report on corporate purpose, and you mentioned that in what you've said already, and you featured prominently in that report with DSM. But there are a number of companies, probably badly advised, have just rebranded their vision statement and are calling it a purpose. You at DSM doing it very differently, and it would be very interesting to hear what your view is on what really a company purpose is.
Hmm. Hmm. So I hope that having spoken a bit about the history and our roots highlights the fact that a purpose comes from deep inside. It's not something which is a one-time exercise of the corporate branding and communication team that can suddenly change your purpose. And it's very important to try and have something that truly resonates with the people inside the company. That's the most important. This is not a PR position. And so ours has basically evolved from being a triple P, people, planet, profit company, to being a very strong ESG embedded company, to this statement of doing something meaningful. And it matured into being increasingly explicit about what is our purpose. And our purpose is, and I'll focus on our nutrition business, which is health through nutrition, health for people, health for the planet. Health for the people is the essence of what we do, because we're all about micronutrients, about immunity, about the right health, about the health of animals, of people, thanks to the quality of nutrition that they're getting. But health for the planet is very core to all that we've done on sustainability. And we've tried to capture that in creating brighter lives for all, which sounds very generic, but the for all is very important. Because it is this concept of you can't be successful in a world that fails. So it really is brighter lives in the impact, and our behavior resonates to the people we work with, to the societies and communities that we work within. And we do find that it is helpful to attach a purpose to some degree to SDG themes, and if you are able to sort of say, well, this is what we can bring to the world. Why is it that the world is a better place if we are successful? That is the best question to ask yourself, of saying, and therefore that should be our purpose. So if you are in fashion, um, why is it better that you are successful and not another company? Well, that's maybe because you have very strict rules on your environmental footprint and how you handle the social and environmental impact of clothing, which is a big challenge. But I think if any company should truly ask themselves, why is the world a better place if we are successful? And in you answering that question, you will probably get to your true sense of purpose. And then it's really about having the courage to speak it out, because some people sort of say, oh, that sounds a little bit sort of airy, fluffy, but it's amazing how it resonates. It resonates internally. It resonates then for talent. People now, they say, "Hey, I want to work for DSM because what you say makes sense and it resonates, and they can feel it immediately. This is real. This goes deep." So that's really where purpose should be coming from.
But Geraldine, there is another aspect here which I think is very important, because uh, you, you can have a fluffy statement, but you can have also a nice one like yours, but you're still not living it. So
Mm.
one of the things that I have seen that people have been, sorry, saying that, blasting out purpose statements and then living another life. And the pandemic has shown this on some occasions, that people weren't living their purpose actually. So
That's even worse. So one is to sort of one mistake is you may be doing the right things, but you try to define a purpose which is disconnected from what you do. It's not that you're doing bad things, but the two aren't in sync. The other one, of course, is that if you make statements that are unsubstantiated, that is a challenge. So, for instance, in our case, it's been absolutely instrumental to embed our ambitions internally through our innovation pipeline. So, for instance, we do ideation around climate ideation for innovation, and that's how we got to some rather weird outcomes, like working on how much methane cows burp, and you don't get there if you're not really working your purpose of saying, how does our science and technology and knowledge of nutrition impact climate change? And this is one of them. If we looked at, for example, the nutrition of aquaculture, salmon is full of omega-3s, which is good for the health of people. But unfortunately, we're fishing out the oceans to feed the salmon the oil that makes them rich in omega-3. So we looked at our biotech capabilities and realized that we are able to produce that oil from the algae itself. So we can feed the salmon directly from the algae, which avoids fishing out the sardines out of the ocean to get the oil. So these are examples. And so, in fact, to really be credible and to build a trust that your purpose means something, you have to have it embedded in who you are, in your targets. So, what are you committing to externally? But also, of course, in how you do business and what you're bringing to your offering. So, for instance, if you make equipment and you want to have a climate claim, you have to show that you've done something to your product to be you leading the world in the right direction on energy consumption or on circularity, on whatever the levers that you have at hand. But it is indeed important. And we find that it focuses the mind in the organization if you actually commit publicly to
mm,
ambitions, because then it sends a very strong signal that it's not just talk. It's something that we're willing to hold ourselves accountable to going forward.
I've just learned a new thing is you're putting salmon on a veggie diet. That's interesting.
Well,
Uh,
interestingly, the salmon is it's like a big fish, but the small fish eat the same thing. And indeed, they can go straight on an algae based diet.
yeah, yeah. It's lovely to hear these things. That unfortunately we're starting to run out of time, and I, we're going to meet again, and I would like to learn more about the examples how you link your purpose with the Sustainable Development Goals. I must say you mentioned the fact that. Uh, Recruitment and also retention of people is an important part of purpose as well. But I guess, again, if you're not living your purpose, it will actually eventually backfire rather than doing what some people suggest, have a purpose statement and your retention rate goes up. It's not like that at all. So thank you very much. Would you like to give our listeners something on the way around purpose and financial success?
Well, I guess the parting words of wisdom could be, particularly to finance colleagues, make it part of the core of your strategy, of your business mission, and of what you feel your function should be bringing to the whole company. This is not something for another department or embedded somewhere else. Of course, it's everywhere, but effectively, we have seen the finance profession evolve over the decades based on the needs of society, from local business to globalization. You needed IFRS standards, etc. The world needs the finance function to embrace sustainability as its core, and it is happening as we speak. So I would say, go embrace it and encourage, particularly the tone comes from the top, so encourage all of your colleagues to live it on a daily basis. and it pays off. I can confirm. It is not a trade-off. It is actually an essential building block for short, medium, and long-term success.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Geraldine. I really enjoyed what you were telling us. And for our audience, if you have enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our podcast series or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. And you can write to us at sustainability@tcb.org. Thank you for listening, and please join us again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you and goodbye.
That was Let's Talk Sustainable Business.